Hello and welcome to the Cardiff Met Sports Coaching Hub podcast.
I'm Ollie Lum.
And I'm Mike Castle.
We're here to bring you insights around all of the latest cutting-edge research within coach education and practice.
You can stay up to date with all of our latest episodes through the links in the podcast description below.
We hope you enjoy the episode.
Okay, welcome to the podcast. Dr Ieuan Davies, I should say, and Gethin, obviously, welcome back. Doctor as well.
No, it's not doctor for me.
Well, you've had it too many times now, Gethin.
Okay,
so last time you were with me, so it's all good.
Okay.
How does it feel, mate? Like you're done?
Yeah, it's been a long slog. I've spoken to a few people recently about completing the doc, and it's a bit anticlimactic, really. When you submit and then you have a 2-month kind of wait, and you work so hard on the project and writing and producing it. And I guess with the support supervisory team, they got me to a place on the submission that the Viva was sort of a bit more fun, talking about the project and the journey I've been through. So a bit anticlimactic, really. The world carried on going. I was coaching and training in the evening straight after. So
yeah, all fun and games though. All fun and games. Okay, today's episode we're talking about your thesis that you've just obviously, like you said, just completed the Viva for. So it's a conflicted coach narrative of coaching identity. Before we get into that, just wanted to kind of ask you why the DSC in the first place. Obviously studied here for undergrad and masters, but why did you choose to go on that DSC program in the first place? And I think you were second cohort as well.
I believe third cohort.
Okay.
Through. Trying to think back now. At the time, there was a bit of uncertainty with myself in terms of where I wanted to go with coaching, where I wanted to go with profession life, perhaps. When you try and be a sport coach, unless you're in maybe some of the populated sports and there's a lot of money going around, you try and find ways of roof over head while you're trying to coach and do your passion and the thing you really love to do. So it was this idea of, and I was in HE and I was doing a bit of part-time lecturing, doing a bit of shadowing, and I thought at the time, with some advice from others, that lecturing, being in higher education, being a lecturer, was an opportunity or a way for me to pay the bills, to then be able to have coaching as a paid passion, so to speak, or a paid hobby alongside, because full-time hockey roles, hockey my background, were not many to come by unless you go into the private school system or you're fortunate enough to be in a performance program, maybe like a sort of high-performing team or an Olympic program. So the DSC was a means for me to get a doctorate and what I needed really to be a lecturer at the time.
Mm-hmm. And obviously the title of your thesis around being conflicted. Geth, did you see some conflict within Ieuan when he first started?
Well, Ieuan's been here for a while, haven't you, Ieuan, in Cardiff Met? When did he?
2012.
2012. So that was an undergraduate, yeah? Mm. Yeah, so I always probably thought, Ieuan, you could be quite challenging at times, can't you, Ieuan? Which was probably, but that was I thought was a positive thing. But Ieuan will tell himself how that conflict sort of emerged in order to do what he wrote. But over the years, you could see a bit of maybe, I don't know what the word is, probably you just wanted something, and you've always asking these spiky questions and be very critical of things, which was a positive thing I used to find. We had some challenges, didn't we, when we got to it? Again, I don't know shall I go into it now? Where Ieuan had we had a different project originally for the Level 8 project, but then we switched to the one that he did in the end. So, but through those conversations, we came up with what the final project, which is really interesting.
Yeah, let's touch upon that then in terms of what was it, 3-4 projects
this
before
was the
this
third decision. Yeah, 2 prior. There was originally a scaffolding project, and I think thinking back, the means for that was to just get the doc over the line. I had Gethin and Robin as supervisors, so it seemed quite straightforward to go down the sort of scaffolding route. We'd done Vygotsky on the module, and it was really interesting and something that I felt like I was doing in my practice. Pedagogy sort of aligned with some of these socio-pedagogic thoughts, so it sort of lent really naturally to that. COVID kind of happened, a lack of coaching, things like that. Didn't really know how the project was going to go, what it was going to look like. knew it was going to be around scaffolding, but couldn't think about sort of what the methodology was, what was the purpose. It was just, let's do a scaffolding project. And I think that was part of the difficulty. I couldn't see further than, so while I was trying to think about literature review and introduction, I was like, I don't know where this is going. I have no idea. So kind of stumbled upon that for far too long, and then made a decision to start again with a different project.
To be with Ieuan, to be fair to Ieuan, with his ideas on pedagogy, teaching and learning are very strong with link to hockey. So on the taught doctorate, we had some excellent discussions in the taught element on things. I've been on the program talking about Vygotsky, and you had some interest in scaffolding and the way constraint-led approach, all different ways, because you through your with your coach education, wasn't it? Sort of these ideas were something you had discussed with us. So it wasn't, we just hadn't gone there, and it just didn't work out at the time. But Ieuan's got some excellent ideas in those areas as well, which he's probably using in practice now. Mm. So, but you ended up going in a different direction for the project.
Yeah, and then I tried to think, because in terms of like, through COVID, there was difficulty with participants and things like that. So I thought, let's do a project that's sort of not reliant on others. Let's do a project that's maybe a bit more me. And then there was an idea of a phenomenology of game day coaching, because that was something that fascinated me, that a lot of the coach education and a lot of what we do in modules is about training and practice in the environment. But how much is it about the game day performance, the actual sort of what players and coaches get defined by, don't they, by what happens on a game day. So that was something. And then the phenomenology literature was difficult to get my head around and to go through. Great when we were in module and things like that on the DSC and talk through in this kind of sense, but in an academic way was tough.
But it's great. It does show how you develop ideas as well. Think of it, from a research perspective. This is what we would think of. Well, you do it as a coach, and in every day with life is try to develop ideas, and we were bouncing ideas off each other. I still think that's a nice idea, that everyday coaching, which we may revisit. Someone can revisit us somewhere along the line. But yeah, it was about finding the right idea and the right project in the end for Ieuan.
Mm. And with that, do you think some of the, I guess, to use the word conflict around your own, what you wanted to study, helped kind of tie into what you ended up actually doing?
Yeah, I think so. The journey I've been on has been, I say difficult. Like a coach trying to find my way, trying to find my niche, where I operate best, where I sort of belong most, and where I operate best. And yet culminated in this sort of narrative of conflict. And it came about a supervisory meeting, because we'd exhausted the phenomenology idea, and I don't think it's really going to work. And Robin at the time went, let's do a project about you. I was like, yeah, okay. And he was like, you do have this sort of conflicted insecurity about you. I was like, you what? Just shattered me, broke me. But then even in the meeting then I was thinking, maybe he's right. I've been in this space at Cardiff Met for what would have been nearly a decade at the time, and still didn't feel like I knew what I wanted to do, who I was in particular. Had some maybe reputation of sort of being difficult in classroom, maybe for the right reasons. But then I thought back in different environments, maybe that wasn't as welcomed, and maybe why I don't operate in some environments that I was operating in previously.
And just to give Robin, he had known Ieuan for a while as well. So he just, he just didn't say it off
20 minutes and then slam me.
Yeah.
Can I ask you what conflict is? I appreciate it's a loaded question, but within your work, have you defined it?
Not really a definition. I think it's quite difficult. And for me, there's a difference in conflict and being conflicted. Because conflict, you'd say there's opposing ideas. Yes, you've got an opinion on something, I've got maybe an opposite opinion. We're at conflict. But for me, this sense of conflicted has roots in that there's multiple opinions. Maybe some of them are dialectic, that they're opposite. So you've got to try and balance those. And I think all coaches balance those, don't we? We have, just in our pedagogy, do we tell or do we question? There's a bit of a conflict going on in your day-to-day interactions. Am I going to do a drill? Am I going to do a game? All these kind of things that are opposites on how we should behave. But then it went deeper than that in a sort of who I was behind what I was coaching. And that's where I was really conflicted, because some roles, or in the multiple roles I was enacting at the time, I was trying to coach the student men's first team, but then I was also teaching some of them on undergraduate pathways, but then I was playing with them in a club setting. So it was sort of, who was I in relation to these people, depending on the context. And then my relationships then were quite conflicted. I'm sure people, and I've had conversations since finishing the project about it, like, oh yeah, I wish you'd have been you. And I was like, well, I didn't really know how to be me. I wasn't sure, because I was conflicted in these, well, what I was trying to get out of it, who was I trying to be?
And talking about that, without wanting to, I guess, skip to the end, do you think the project has highlighted to yourself like who you are in that sense?
Well, a very good question. I think the culmination of the project and the decision on a data set, a data period, which we'll talk about a minute further, came about a realization of where I wanted to go and who I was. So I wouldn't say the project led me to maybe an epiphany of understanding, but going back through and understanding the reasons why was a direct result of completing the project.
Maybe we'll flesh that out as we go. I guess to both of you then, it starts with a conversation with Robin, basically saying, perhaps you're conflicted, let's do something about you. How do you turn that into a legitimate piece of research rather than just asking Ieuan about himself, essentially? Like, where did that process start?
So I just start with explaining what happened then. So then we had a change of supervisory teams where Manel and Gareth came in because of Robin moving towards retirement. I hope he won't mind it towards that, but he's still working. So we had a change there. And that's probably where the change of emphasis came. And really, it was down to Manel and Ieuan initially just to get going, wasn't it, really? To get so talking about things and then starting on that early stage. So it was really initially just getting a conversation about it and getting Ieuan to read around things. Would that be fair to say with Ieuan with it?
Yeah, I think so. Going towards some of Robin's work and who is coaching, he sort of guided me that way. And there's a 2016 Purdy Potrak paper with an athletics coach kind of trying to find their way through job roles and not getting job roles, things like that. So that's where it really started, this sense of who is coaching for me. And then you'd go look at maybe some more identity literatures and things like that. And I found that there was a lot of talk around identity and who people were, but a lot of the work was conducted by the other, not the person. So researchers were trying to find the identities of others. And as we know, if you're interviewing someone, you get the snapshot of the hour of who they are, and maybe they're telling you who they want you to think they are. So then it really went, well, I need to do this project through my eyes, through my history, my thoughts, feelings, experiences. And then naturally, and Gareth's background as well, in sort of the auto-ethnographic spaces, led us down that route to complete the research that way.
Yeah, and on auto-ethnography, when did you kind of realise that we're gonna do this now? I'm gonna write a whole PhD using stories, essentially. Like, how did you feel about that?
I think I was quite excited, to be honest. And like a question in the Viva was in around, what was the ethics behind sort of revealing yourself in the project? And I guess part of maybe how I've been in classroom in the past and how I've been difficult, because I wasn't afraid to maybe put myself out there and ask a difficult question, because I thought that's what would get a good response from the room and maybe get people to value me. So I wasn't too nervous, I guess.
Yeah.
Whether that's because it was me looking at me, maybe I'm hiding traumas. I don't want to bring them up and about.
But it probably helped that when we start having the conversations, and we may revisit this as we go along, is that auto-ethnography isn't just about Ieuan. It's about how it can link to other coaches or even further. And that's what we started realizing as you started explaining your experiences and describing your experiences from over this period of time. We could relate to it, both Manel and Gareth and me as coaches, and I could relate it to even further as just working as employment. So you could make the links from Ieuan's experiences to the challenges people face in everyday life. So that was it was just more than just Ieuan's. It's very important, this Ieuan story, but it could link to other social things as well, which was really important.
And how much conflict was there within that process? Because from what I know about the project anyway, you would go to meetings, maybe you've shared a story, and then you would have a bit of back and forth about what's really going on within those stories.
Well, if we explain how it worked, right?
Yeah, go on, talk about the process.
It'd be probably easier to explain about the process and then correct me if I've got any of this wrong. But what worked really well was Ieuan decided, right, I'm going to do this every week, didn't we? We decided, right, we're going to meet weekly for a couple of hours, it was by the end, I think even as we started off, and we're going to go from there. So once you started doing that, then I think it put pressure on Ieuan to do something, and then Ieuan would come with an idea, and we'd sit in the Oven Research House, and the four of us have a discussion, wouldn't we? Yeah. And that's where, you could be reflexive, and then we'd have a discussion, and it was really trying to, work through these ideas and these stories as we went along.
I think for me, prior to us sort of sitting down and talking about stories, what really helped me was the mapping exercise I completed. When we decided on a data period to think back on where was the coaching history going to come about from, and it was sort of when I was 18, finishing FE through to the sort of termination, me leaving a coaching role, which was kind of the end of my conflicted self in terms of I knew where I wanted to go. So this mapping exercise was going year by year. Where were the roles? What was I doing in education? Where was I in my studies? And then I started working out, who are the characters? Who are the people who might operate in this space? And then going year by year, I was just jotting down some potential storylines, things that were really memorable to me. So I'd be like, okay, I was assistant coach here. Oh, I remember this training camp, or I remember this training session, or this interaction off pitch with this player. And I just jot down the potential story thread there. It might not have necessarily led to conflict. I think it probably did, because I had this lens, because naturally it was about the project. But then I had all these sort of potential memories, and I was mining these memories, which is something in the auto-ethnographic literature to talk about. And then I'd sort of decide, is this really about conflict? What does it speak to me in a conflicted self? And then I'd sort of, if it was like, this could be a really nice story, I'd write it out more of a bit of a screenplay kind of to the supervisory team to start with. So who are the key people, what happened, rather than go into real depth of bringing my personal voice and experience into it straight away, which was quite taxing to produce stories in sort of an evocative storytelling way. It was more of a screenplay. Here's what happened, play by play, and then we would talk through. What does that speak to conflict? What is that? Why were you conflicted here? What was really going on? And then we could sort of decide. Maybe this is a story to keep and go along, or it was this doesn't really speak to anything. There's not much in here.
So that time frame was about 10 years.
12 years. 12 years. Yeah.
So you managed to get 2 stories and 6 instances that basically speak to 12 years.
In the end, yeah. And
so
two overall stories and then 3 vignettes inside each story. Yeah.
Talk about that then, because having read them, I think it, and obviously knowing you as well, I do think it really speaks to that. But that must have been such a difficult process, deciding what makes it and what doesn't, essentially.
Yeah, really tough. And so many of our supervisory meetings would have been, what's the purpose of this story? How does it speak to one? Because I think I'd originally narrowed it down to 10 individual vignettes. And then I was like, how do these really fit? I think what really helped was, as we were writing the stories, that sort of couple of themes came out of the work. And Gareth really helped in sort of fleshing those out in terms of sense of belonging and becoming. These kind of themes that were maybe embedded in lots of the stories, lots of the conversations, that I was trying to belong somewhere, and that was a part of the conflict because I couldn't belong, or I was trying to become someone, or who was I trying to be? And then once we kind of started fleshing these themes out as we were producing the data, I guess sort of finalising stories after we decided, it was sort of easier for us to package stories or vignettes together into an overall story. And I guess some liberties in the creative nonfiction, there were opportunities to bring maybe a line from a story or a time point that didn't necessarily exist in the specific timeline or the story produced, but it still allowed an opportunity to present this sense of conflict that I was going through.
I think it just highlights to people it's not just straightforward of how difficult it is to do. It isn't just like observing something and then giving a tick or counting. You know, you suddenly you're there, and you had to go through the process, and we did, and that's what happened. It was difficult, challenging conversations, starting, as you said, with the timeline, bringing the stories in, and then discussing. And as you said, it's data analysis, isn't it? As you were going through it, themes emerged, and then the expertise in the room would bring in the ideas. So Gareth brought in ideas, and Manel, yourself, and then me. We just brought things in and we discussed things, and that's how it happened. But it wasn't easy. People would just say, "Well, you just wrote a few stories." Well, it wasn't. It wasn't just and goes away for 2 hours and writes all these 10 stories, and then we come and discuss them. It did. It was an in-depth, critical discussion, and which produced these vignettes and stories.
And you mentioned the ethics. Of course, you had to share some of these stories with some of those key characters as well. How did you find that? Were you nervous going back to some of these characters from your previous coaching roles and sharing essentially what you thought about some situations?
Yeah, in a way. Fortunately, I think I'd, in a number of conversations prior, and maybe some relationships I'd continued to have, I'd been quite reflexive and understood maybe how I was interacting in my sort of younger coaching self. So those relationships are still quite good. And obviously, before I sent extracts off, I would sort of, there's some creative license here to sort of maybe use the language because I'm trying to portray something. I'm trying to get people to really live and feel it. And also a disclaimer that this is what I thought and felt at the time. I'm not saying it was correct, as in so correct for them. It was how I felt it was. And obviously, naturally, we all interpret things differently. So really made clear before sending some extracts to persons or the characters involved in the project.
Yeah. Let's chat about the stories then. You mentioned belonging and becoming. Story one is kind of titled Belonging to a Program. It's so hard to do, of course, and I'd urge people to go and read the stories themselves if they're interested, but what are you really talking about here?
So the sense of belonging was around being valued, and belonging in a space was predicated on how I was valued in my role and my skills and my ability. So not to give too much away in terms of ethics, but it was a county program, how I wrote it. I was a novice coach, been asked to be an assistant coach. I was very young, sort of in my 20s at the time, and I was sort of doing this HE thing, but then obviously you've got the applied sense of a non-HE program. And I was trying to bring in all these, I want to say fancy ways, but all these sort of highbrow thinking, all the theory, all the academic sense. And I thought that's what would help with the program and sharing these ideas. And I thought that's what people would be like, yeah, and he's amazing. Let's get him involved. Let's make him head coach. But then it sort of didn't manifest that way. And that's where the conflict occurred, because I was trying to give these ideas and then people's on the other side, maybe not as receptive. And then sort of distance happened.
Yeah, and what did happen, because there's a particular moment you kind of mentioned when you're out for food and you kind of really thinking through, am I going to chip in here? When do I make my point to demonstrate yourself as I guess worthy? Is that fair to say? Or
yeah, I think worthy, valued. Because in all spaces we want people to think we're good, don't we? Mm-hmm. We don't go into a room hoping that we're the worst person in the room. We go in hoping that people will like us and get some value from us. So yeah, the first vignette was a planning meeting, and the first one I'd ever attended. So I was really excited. Yeah, how can I share my opinions and what am I doing? Am I standing off? Am I just going to stay silent? And I did stay silent for most of the meeting because there were people more senior than me, more experienced in the space. So they had lots of history, chatting to each other, etc. And there was a sort of a problem that had come about from the program that they wanted to address from previous years. We need to solve this kind of problem with the team. And I just gave a quite maybe, I was trying to be, I don't know what the word, maybe soft with it. I wasn't trying to be difficult and be like, yeah, I'm going to be a horrible so-and-so here. Asked the question and then just got slammed, just shot down straight away. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe opportunities to ask or have my opinion valued here weren't there. Maybe I didn't belong enough yet for them to appreciate my ideas. But if I was there for 5-10 years, or maybe I'd belonged to the program, then my opinion might have been valued, and they might have heard the question properly and taken time to understand it.
And going back to what you mentioned earlier, Geth, in terms of it relating to other people, like having obviously read these stories myself, that's where you really feel your kind of, I guess, your emotions there, in terms of how it felt to be shut down within a space where you were just trying to kind of make your way in as a young coach.
Yeah, I think I described sort of the manifestation of the sort of the tumbleweed coming through the middle of the restaurant while we're waiting for an answer. I was like, oh, yeah.
But what I related to it as well, where, this is where I think you can make it broader than just Ieuan's experiences, was I just felt I've been in that position, and so many people who have been in meetings and work or any type of work, and you're there, you think, you can see you're thinking, should I say something or not here? And that's what it was for you, wasn't it? I remember you thinking, and that's what I find quite fascinating. People can relate to that. And then you do make the decision, right, I'm going for it. And then suddenly, bam, you're shot down. And then there's issues of power and, all different things coming into it as well. But, that's where you make it more than just, what's going on here. It's more than just it's just a story about Ieuan. And even though it is about Ieuan as well. So, but that's where we could see the power of auto-ethnography with it, really.
So that's a bit of an insight into belonging. What about story 2 then, in terms of becoming a juniors coach? And I know this is quite obviously linked to what you're doing now as well.
That first part of sort of narrative of conflict was the belonging, but then the second part was who I was becoming, and the story starts off with conversation with a coach about different coaching roles, and this coach had been offered or had been approached to take on a role, and I was like, I'd love to have that role. And then this coach goes on to say, well, I'll get this person as my assistant coach, or run the performance team, and I get you into and be head of juniors. And at the time I was like, what head of juniors? I should be the performance coach. I'm really good. Like, why aren't you considering me? I felt it was such a defamation of my coaching that I was sort of labelled as this, you're a juniors coach. And this is how the story starts in there. How I'm, I guess, becoming the person I am now, because at the time I felt that to go down the coaching journey, you have to go all the way through the ladder. You start in grassroots, you go up, you be a performance coach, you go to the Olympic level. That's sort of the hierarchy of what you're supposed to go and do. And the rest of the story is then the second story, the second vignette is in around a meeting with a mentor, and sort of a further understanding that actually who I am and where I operate best is in junior spaces. And that's where I feel most natural. That's where I feel like I do my best work. And then the third story then is a sort of combination of that. It's a conversation with the director of hockey to quit my role as a performance coach and really go down the route that I wanted to go down, which is now I'm running a junior program, have my own business doing private coaching, which is typically in junior spaces.
It was interesting when we had these conversations, though, and we were meeting regularly, and Ieuan was bringing the story. It was, you could see the conflict in Ieuan, or why the hell do they want me to do this? Now, at the same time, if you read the stories, you can flip it around, and they were very, very complimentary of Ieuan. He didn't see the compliments coming in, did we? And we discussed this a few times. People were complimenting you, but because you had that preset idea, I need to go, to work along this ladder then, or that way, then suddenly it was, why are they? And you can see the conflict coming in that way. And that was quite fascinating, because when I we were reading the stories, actually, he's actually helping you. He's complimenting you, but because of that's the way you were thinking at the time, you didn't see it.
Yeah, and this is where, since completing the project, when I'm working with the coaches that are in some of the programs and work for the business as well, I'm trying to look for the right phrase here. There's a real danger when we start labeling our identity as a coach in some fixed roles. So I think that's what the conflict was for me in this story of becoming, and it was really important that it's becoming, not who I've become. that I'm not a static, I'm not a fixed role. At the time in the first vignette, I thought I was a performance coach. I was this fixed, I want to be a performance coach. And then being labeled, having this branding of you're a juniors coach, was sort of broke me, hurt me. And it's sort of until the conversations are really understanding who I'm becoming and continually becoming, really allow me to sort of reduce the conflict. And there was a phrase that I think Gareth came up with in the end when we were talking about these things, was this idea that the context causes conflict. So in sort of the junior spaces that I was operating in, then I had opportunity to allow my sort of creative self, my sort of anti-establishment self to operate. But who knows if I was in the junior space where I wasn't allowed that, maybe that's maybe where I wouldn't operate best, and I'd need to become or becoming somewhere else or in somewhere else as well.
You mentioned you're now head of a juniors program. Do you see some of this conflict of being labelled juniors coach in some of the coaches you work with? Do you think they see it maybe as it's a stepping stone rather than end game, if you like? Yeah,
I think so, 100%. There is that kind of, you're just with the under 8s or you're just with the under 10s. I'll do an hour with the under 14s tonight, and then sort of when you're working your way up, I've got a lady second team training here. There's this sort of perception of status as you go up a ladder to more senior, to more performance kind of spaces. Yeah, definitely see it. And I understand why, like in all roles, you start off in sales and then you go middle management and then you want to go into corporate roles because that's where the money and security is. So you do understand it.
Just before we get into some of that wider significance, I guess, question for both of you. Do you have a favourite vignette, either of you?
I'm trying to think now. It's all great work, obviously. It's all very good.
All of it.
I like that the first one is very good in the pizza place.
Yeah.
The hockey one where you change your tactics is a good one as well.
Yeah, that's I like that one.
Where you suddenly decide to, go for it and
go Mourinho, be really pragmatic.
where it's completely opposite to what your creative side of things. They're all pretty. The one where you in the cinema as well when you meet your mentor.
Yeah,
and that's you actually meet your mentor in the cinema, in a cafe in the cinema, which was quite So that one showed where you get that sudden realization. This is where I'm. This moment. This is where I'm going.
So you're just all of them.
All of them.
Go on. Pick one of them.
There's one vignette that wasn't included. There was a moment that I really wanted to include, but we couldn't fit it into the story and. Maybe for the size of the project and the scope of the project. But there was one time we were at a European tournament and I was sort of in the role of a player in this kind of sense. And one of the other players with us, I was coaching him in the performance team as well. So I had this dual role and hadn't really taught him, but obviously I was in this sort of lecturing space. So there was also a hierarchical kind of thing there. And we were away at this indoor tournament and he was lauded to be this very good indoor player. And the first time I'd ever played, really. So I had a bit of a joke with him that if I scored more goals than him, he'd have to do a sort of a challenge at the end. And he was like, yeah, fine, I'll be fine. And then lo and behold, he doesn't have a great tournament. I somehow just bodge a couple of goals and beat him in the goals tally. So beers on the way home at in the hotel on the way back, sort of just ribbing into him. Obviously, I was sort of on student committees back in the day, so I was like going back to my old self of being a student and doing all those kind of things. And he was like, oh, I didn't know you could be this much fun. And I was like, oh my God, really? It still sticks with me to this day. That sense that why couldn't my players see me for me? And I was someone different. Who I was different when I was delivering to them. And it goes back to this, like the context caused conflict because I had all these other roles. I was trying all these different hats I was trying to put on and different behaviors. So I couldn't be me. And I go back to the day now. It's like, oh, well, would I have been better as a coach than if I'd have allowed myself to be a bit more me, who I was.
Sounds like you put the wrong stories in, Geth. I blame the supervisory team.
No.
I blame her now.
Now with that, I think because that would have been a different strand then.
Yeah.
That was a sort of one isolated story.
It was a nice story, but didn't fit into.
No.
But that's how you have to make the decisions. You know, how does the overall narrative come together, and which represents what you wanted to say. So
yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about the significance then. We've already spoken about a bit around just it relating to other people, but where does the significance of this project lie? Because not myself, but you could get people turning around to you and saying, great, you describe it as developing a view of yourself. Great, you've done that. But how does it go beyond developing a view of you and your coaching?
As Geth's alluded to, people sort of reading into the stories or reading themselves through the story or through the stories, which I guess has been really important. And it was really not heartwarming because it wasn't as fuzzy as that, but it was gave me real confidence while I was producing the stories that the supervisory team were like, oh yeah, this speaks to an experience I've had, or oh, this reminds me of this or that. And I was like, oh, well, I'm only drafting these stories, so they're not the final product. And we were having conversation and we were relating experiences back and forth. So that for me, in a first sense, that just reading about the stories would help others to maybe go back and think about some of the roles and some of the conflicts they've had in their coaching past.
I think there's, back related with the first story, there are sort of micro-political things going on in that first story, issues of power. And I think it does, for any individual in any situation, any employment, it's, what decisions, you've got the agency, you have the ability to make decisions and take actions, but when do you do them? And I think that's what that first story really stands out for me in that way is, when do I talk up? And that, to be fair to Ieuan, he's never been afraid to say his opinion. So that's probably it. Really, that one really stands out in that way, how it links to in that way and beyond what Ieuan said. And even in the Viva, we mentioned, this could be quite useful from looking at not every person who does an undergraduate, needs to aim to be, a top-end coach, it's the importance of coaching at all levels. And, this is a potential way for you to go. Coach as entrepreneur, wasn't it? That's what came out.
This was something, it wasn't directly something we were looking for out of the project. As we know, like with coaching, there's only so many people who can be a coach of a team. There's only so many teams. So the sense of how can coaches go and be a bit more entrepreneurial, go and find opportunities to set up their own either community clubs or like what I've done, sort of private coaching and technical skills based. So yeah, that was an interesting point to come out of the Viva and something we hadn't really explicitly thought through and wanted to talk about. Obviously, it was naturally there when the second story is about me becoming this sort of genius coach and running my own business. I guess that there was also an extra bit to maybe to go further with is this sense of a lot of coaches now are coming and starting their coaching journey on a degree pathway instead of coaches maybe being former players and they pick up coaching, or they're a volunteer parent and they pick up coaching after a playing career has happened or later in life. And this was part of the sort of conflict in the first story and this belonging to the program, is that I had this academic self that I was developing because I was 20, starting my coaching and going through degree pathways, and I was being taught about these theories, and I was like, yeah, this is amazing, this is how we should do coaching, but it was in opposition to what was actually happening on the ground in the applied setting that I was operating in. So I think this, hopefully the work will shed some light also on the coaches who are starting their journeys throughout higher education, because this was a bit of a dialectic that came out of the belonging and becoming, that the person we want to become or we are becoming is predicated on how well we belong to a place. Because if naturally the places we operate in, we kind of align ourselves, our identities to those spaces and places. So then what do? Do you try and fit in first and then lose that bit of yourself? Or do you continue to try to be yourself but then you don't belong? Which was inherently something that was prevalent in the first story, that I had this academic self that I thought was really good, that being the critical friend, asking the critical questions, I thought was what was supposed to be happening. But then when I try to do it and I try to do things a bit differently, it isn't what the applied context wanted or needed.
It's sort of the, in previous podcasts we mentioned about the anti-intellectual thing. We could put the argument there as well. Because brought some great ideas. We want to get rid of that divide between theory and practice we discussed before, but he's brought these ideas into what he was doing and thinking with these ideas. But ultimately, you get trumped a lot of the time by people who've played the game within coaching, and that's just something that's consistent in all different sports. And even for Ieuan, that would probably be a bit of a challenge for you as well, wasn't it? You're trying to make yourself to a certain place, and then you've got people coming in as well from everywhere. But that is probably one of the main things, is to try and again highlight the value of having an academic underpinning to your coaching as well, which it's been highlighted again recently that suddenly all these Portuguese coaches who are in the Premier League have all been to university, and how the importance of that. We've been saying that for years. So it's just to people to understand the importance really of how they can combine and work well together.
With that, then, you've mentioned your coaching and stuff. What is next for you? There's a paper in here somewhere, but
yeah, there could be. It's been a long slog since 2012, so give myself some space for now. To go in, and that was part of the reason why we decided to finish the project, because I was very close to, and with the data, how it finished, the culmination of that coaching role was in and around the time where we decided to start this project, and the line from Robin about this conflicted self. The reason why we decided to finish the project, there was that. What I wanted to do right now was to try and be a full-time coach, either with my junior program or grow my business, things like that. But there was always a finish this off, because I've been doing it so long, and my other half would have throttled me if I didn't finish it and spend all that time and stress and frustration. But then also a later life, possibly. I've been quite honest with it. There might be a time where there's been too many times it's been raining or too many cold nights. I'm like, this isn't what I want to be doing now. And I will have this process of becoming something new and going back into the HE space where having the doctorate will really help. And maybe in 6 months, 12 months, or come back and have a look at what this research could amount to in terms of some publications. What I'm more interested in is what the sort of significance of the work will do to help me on my day-to-day and the coaches I interact with, and hopefully have some conversations, because you and I, Ollie, I think we've spoken about before, sometimes I'm frustrated with the coaches I operate with in terms of what they do and the quality of what they do. And I'm like, it's not what I do. And then I got to pinch myself and go, well, I can't have 15 other me's. It's never going to be possible. It's the strength of coaches is who they are. And the sooner they can kind of understand more about who they are, helps in their delivery, because there's a real line that sticks with me in Robin's in the Who is Coaching 2012 paper from Jose Mourinho. He's like, I'll deliver a session and someone could copy exactly the same words, exactly the same practice. The cones could be exactly the same place. It wouldn't be the same because it's not him who's coaching. And I guess that's what I'm most excited about, is the coaches I'm interacting with and how I can possibly help them get to understand who they are, will help their journey of becoming.
Absolutely. And just before we, I guess, wrap this podcast up, then we ask all our guests to talk about a bit of a coaching rant, a bit of around what vexes you that you see in coaching or in coaching theory. Do you have something for us to share?
Yeah, I think it is a bit of a frustration, but as we probably alluded to at the moment, the importance in the sort of grassroots, the bottom end, and maybe trying to shift some focus as to why we don't put our best resources and assets across, I guess, spread them everywhere. We don't want to just then flood the bottom end. But a coach told me years ago, I was like, well, what if we had world-class under-10s coaches? When they'd solve a lot of problems for later on in terms of what we're trying to deliver. yeah, that is something for me that I'm continuing to champion. I mean, I still get to this day. I'm like, with the junior program I run, I head coach the under-10s team. And I'm sure some people look at me and go, oh, you got 15 years of coaching, you got a doctorate, and you're just wasting yourself on under-10s team. I'm like, no, I've got a group of 30 here who could go on and be Olympians. And if I've started that journey because of what I've done, then that's where I need to be. That's where I'm going to be best.
Would it be fair to say as well, without what you've set up, you wouldn't be able to do that and employ you, well, to get money for doing it? Because essentially, if you're doing under-10s normally, you're a volunteer coach, aren't you?
Sure.
And that's where, so really...
And that's where this sort of speaks to this entrepreneurial side. Can you find ways to get some income streams possibly into those spaces?
But it's an ongoing issue, isn't it? And, as much as, obviously as I'm a parent, within this, parents do lots of coaching. And, I think few people have said to me over the years, well, we let somebody go on a course for a weekend and let them coach our kids, and we've got no problem with that, but we wouldn't let them teach them maths or teach them to read or something if they'd only be on a weekend course. So, that's sort of, I think I sort of echo what Ieuan's just said there. It's exactly that, if you could find a way of setting it up where, well, schools would be the obvious way as well, where people after school clubs would help with that, but at the same time, whether we could do it within the clubs to get better support and for players at all sports and all levels, and it's in all countries as well. It's not just here.
Absolutely. Well, look, thank you both for coming on the podcast. Thanks for coming back, Gethin. Your first time, guys. I'm sure you'll be back again once the paper's done. And thanks to the Cardiff Met broadcasting team as well, particularly Manuel, he's solo in the studio today. So as always, he's pulling the strings in the background. But thanks for listening, and we'll catch you very soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cardiff Met Sports Coaching Hub podcast.
If you enjoyed the episode, leave us a rating and a review on your favourite podcast platform. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe.
If you want to stay up to date with all of the latest work coming out of the Coaching Hub, please follow us on social media. All the relevant links are in the description.
And if you'd like to be featured in an upcoming listener special episode, drop us your questions to coachinghub@cardiffmet.ec.uk.